So, welcome to the ACT podcast, to today's episode where we're exploring what it means to teach maths Christianly. Well, I'm Lizzie, and I'm joined by a very special guest, John Westwell, who has a number of accolades. He is Director of System Leadership at the National Centre for Excellence in the Teaching of Mathematics, which is a bit of a mouthful, and apparently the visionary behind the Maths Hubs programme, which supports nearly 60% of schools across England. And I'm sure he can keep us up to date with, with all the other things he's been involved in, but he's also just been awarded an MBE for his services to education. So congratulations, John. So today we'll be thinking about how the Christian faith can shape the way we teach maths. Yes, even maths with integrity, creativity, and purpose, and godly purpose. So, John, tell us a little bit, just briefly, about your role, your history in the classroom as well. I'd love to know a little bit more about you before we dive into the kind of the meat of it.
Well, thanks, Lizzie. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. And it's great to hear the things that you've got going on the podcast, as well as people reflect from their perspective as a Christian teacher. I don't know quite what the MBE was for, but perhaps it's longevity. So next year will be my 40th year working in education. And so it feels a long time ago when I started teaching mathematics back in 1986. It was the last year of CSE and O-levels. So I just crept in there and taught CSE for a year. I've been involved with maths education and education more broadly, professional development of teachers, school improvement, all sorts of things over those years. I won't give you my full career biography. I've been really privileged to work for the last 12 or so years for an education charity called MEI, Maths in Education Industry, and my role for them has been to work with the National Centre for Excellence in Teaching of Mathematics. So I get to look at maths from a kind of a slightly withdrawn perspective now. Maths education, a lot of my work is to do with policy and school development and professional development and leadership development for mathematics. But I'm still fascinated, as I was back in 1986, about the fundamental act of teaching mathematics and how you do that well and how you do that as a Christian. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey over the years.
Well, I won't make you feel ancient now, but when you started teaching was when I was 1.
Okay.
So let's just have a think at the kind of the big picture.
Yeah.
Because I suppose I'm an English teacher, and there's always that, I don't know, there's a bit of a cliche that, you know, if you're a kind of literary or if your brain is more focused on language and literature or humanities, then obviously you mustn't be very good at maths or must not understand the cognitive processes that go on in maths in quite the same way as a committed mathematician. And I suppose I probably broadly fit into that default way of thinking. I kind of got through maths at school. So what is the connection between your faith and the subjects you teach?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and it's how you come to form ideas about this. So, you know, I had a strong maths education, and so I studied maths at Cambridge. You know, that's and so, you know, I had a successful time. I don't think I made a commitment to follow Jesus when I was at university. So but when I was I don't think I made the connection particularly at that stage. And it was only as I started to think about teaching and engaging with teaching, and I might say some of the influences that I had that helped me with that I started to wonder, I suppose, around, so what's this going to mean to me as a Christian teacher of mathematics? I think the way I would understand it now, and one of the things that I was influenced early on was worldview thinking, I guess, and coming across that. And there was my vicar in Cambridge, Doug Holt, was a really significant thinker. His wife also had a big role in education as well, and together they were very influential. he got me thinking in those terms, and I suppose it's coming to understand that the different disciplines that we call subjects are fundamentally just different domains of knowledge that help us to understand and appreciate the world, or from a Christian perspective, to understand and appreciate God's world. And so they're different, and that's one of the joys, really. And I think I'm not a great fan. I don't know if this is Christian perspective or not, but I'm of putting people in pigeonholes where they can only appreciate the world from one perspective. Perhaps that's the collaborative challenge of a school, is to help young people come to appreciate the world in different perspectives. So you would do a very different thing in an English classroom from what I might do in the maths classroom, but it's not to try and set one up against the other. They're different.
Absolutely.
They're complementary. Absolutely. And I think so. You focus in on the thing that you know, and I obviously I really appreciated mathematics. I thrived in mathematics. That was good for me. In the same ways, it will be different for different people. But I suppose what I would, where I've come to, is an understanding that, well, I don't really want that to be for a select few.
Sure.
But yeah, so I started to think about mathematics, what exactly like you said at the start of the podcast, what difference does it make being a Christian? Well, I think it's the key for me around this is not so much to try and be distinctive, but to be faithful to the worldview, and to recognize that if you commit to I guess kind of knowing the world and appreciating the world and what God is calling you to, that will open you up to appreciate new things. And the mathematics is one of the ways of doing that. And I can give examples of that. But yeah, I think it was beginning to do that early on in my teaching career, which, I started reading lots of things, and then discovering really that there's lots in the history of mathematics, which is very integrated with philosophy, with religion, with cultural development, with a whole range of stuff, and you start to see the interplay of a particular subject discipline and wider things. So yeah, interesting area.
That's really helpful. And I think I was excuse the pun, but I was kind of playing a bit of devil's advocate there. And absolutely, I think although I'm a lover of literature and words and ideas, I completely see what you mean, in terms of the other side of the coin. You could argue that maths somehow reflects the order, the structure of God's creation, how, although it can sometimes feel that maths is abstract, actually a lot of what you're learning is part of God's created reality.
Yes.
In number and space, and requires some kind of consistent universal. I mean, I'm sure you'll be able to tell me all kinds of mathematical rules or exceptions to rules, but I suppose absolutely, I think pitting maths teachers and English teachers against each other is definitely never a good idea.
No.
The irony is, though, I was just saying to you, wasn't I, before we started this podcast, that my daughter, who's 7, this evening just had hope she'll forgive me for saying this, had a bit of a meltdown because she was really struggling with her maths homework. And she was saying, Mummy, I just don't get it. I just hate maths. It's rubbish. And there's just something in her that, I don't know, kind of physically recoils when it comes to maths, in a way that doesn't happen with...
No, exactly. And it's interesting. I mean, we could explore that if you want to at some stage. But let me just pick up a bit on what you've just said. I think because we live in a largely secularized society, particularly where we are now, that some of the language of faith and discipline as that they seem as separate things. And I remember part of some of the value of looking from a historical perspective is recognizing people haven't always thought that way. So major mathematicians, really significant mathematicians in the history of mathematics were committed Christians who who just didn't see a division. I was one of the things that we did in a project. I'll talk a bit about that later. Is the Caris project, and one of the people that helped me to discover more about was Kepler. You may have heard the name. It's a really significant astronomer, mathematician. It shaped a lot of the ideas that we came to understand about the universe and so on, and did deep mathematical work. And I was finding one of his quotes that I got at the time when we were doing this work, and I'll just let me read it to you because it kind of makes the point. So he's talking about how he's moved into the work of mathematics and astronomy and so on. And he writes this: "I give thanks to you, Lord Creator, because you have lured me into the enjoyment of your work, and I've exulted in the works of your hands. Behold, now I have consummated the work to which I pledged myself, using all the abilities you gave me." And that speaks of somebody who's come to appreciate that he's come to know God in a deeper way, come to appreciate God's order and creation and so on through the discipline that he was involved with, which is that kind of form, well, really significant applied mathematical thinking, actually. And of course, there will be lots of people, and they're on our telly a lot of the time, who will also do a program on cosmology, and they won't have that response. They will have a degree of awe and amazement and so on, and that's fine, and that's they're coming from that perspective. But I think it's important to understand that there are different responses to this, and there have been, and really significant people.
That's a really helpful point to make, because I think as someone who I studied maths to GCSE, I suppose I would see that, mathematics is numbers and formulas and equations, and but I suppose you're saying that although there's a certain level of neutrality when it comes to teaching those things, actually the response that it inspires within you will never be neutral. Would you say that's true? Is that what you're
I think that's true. I mean, we've heard that it wasn't a neutral response from your daughter. That it does evoke emotional responses, and I'm not necessarily saying there, oh well, you're going to have that sort of going on inside your year 10 maths classroom. But what I'm saying is that's the nature of what knowledge can bring to us within a worldview, and that's as true for mathematics or science or English or modern foreign languages. Different appreciations of the world and culture can lead us to respond in different ways. And so there are all sorts of things in mathematics that I think are special about mathematics that add value to our ways of knowing. So you've talked some ones that people might immediately kind of recognize are things to do with pattern and harmony and appreciating that and how you can see that in all sorts of different ways, and how patterns connect across what seems like very diverse things, and there's that underlying order and connection between things. That's one sort of area that people often appreciate. Again, it's one of those things that sometimes maths enthusiasts talk about, and other people look on askance when they start talking about the beauty of mathematics and so on. And I think to pull that off in the classroom is it takes quite a skilled teacher to lead pupils to that. But there is again, it's again appreciating that people do see beauty and do appreciate the significant and incredibly complex order and underlying pattern within the universe that we inhabit. And so it's not expecting everybody to respond in that way, but I think that's part of a cultural awareness and so on. So that's one area. The other really significant area, I think, and is often argued, one of the reasons why mathematics has always had a strong place in the curriculum is the really fundamental emphasis on reasoning and helping people to learn the discipline of being able to reason, to connect ideas, and at a slightly higher level to understand the ideas of proof,
Yeah.
and so on. So that's a very distinctive thing, and one of the appeals of mathematics.
Sure.
One of the things about mathematics, you don't need very much to engage in mathematics. You really do just need a pencil and paper, and you can go and explore universes really. So it's rich in its possibility. Um, uh, uh, and yeah, so I think those are ones that people often recognize. The third one I'd want to mention is, which is a slightly more modern mathematics. It doesn't feel like it now because it's been around in our curriculum for a while. But a lot of work has happened in the last 400 years around more probability and statistics. And so you could say that's fundamentally how we deal with uncertainty and difference, and understand uncertainty and difference. And mathematics has played quite a role in shaping thinking around that. So all of those are distinctives that I think mathematics, as it has developed, it hasn't always had that. It is itself a cultural product. It's developed over in society over time, and has come to influence the way we think and appreciate the world. And some of that's found its way into the school curriculum. And there's just a chance that some of that underlying stuff could come through if taught in the right way.
That's really interesting, and I'm already starting to see that maths has incredible applications that can be used within a Christian worldview. How it can be used for dealing with all the kinds of things that you mentioned, well, probability and societal kind of uncertainty, etc. And there are ethical implications that we can use maths for kind of evaluating. We can be thinking about justice, the common good, etc. And I'm also very interested in the way that you talked about the development of maths and human culture, and particularly the kind of the philosophical side of it as well, the idea of reason and that philosophical side of it, which I'd never really considered before.
No, and there's been the strong connection over the years between mathematics and philosophy. I mean, very close connections. That's perhaps less the case these days, but I think one of my reflections, I suppose, is that having said that, mathematics can help develop your reasoning, your appreciation of rationality, I think. The other thing, if it's being probably what wasn't understood in the earlier stages around when philosophers were almost seeing it as the solution, can we get back to first principle, can we derive everything, is there's a limits to rationalism as well. So it's both understanding the power of that, but also recognizing that all rationalism is founded on some kind of underlying assumptions, and so you have to build from there. And some of the projects which are mathematical stroke philosophical projects have sort of collapsed in on themselves ultimately, where people have tried to find a way through that. So there's also the recognition, and that's again possibly a useful thing in comparing disciplines, is seeing the limits also of different disciplines, and not to try and mathematics, there's a danger that mathematics is privileged sometimes in the way that we make judgments about all sorts of things, which people react against or seek to elevate. But so there's care required in understanding the limits of what any one area can help you appreciate and know, I think.
Sure. I know that you're not currently kind of in a classroom setting, but would anything that you've just said, would that ever resonate with, I don't know, the kind of the day-to-day graft of teaching? Would exploring the development of kind of maths, culture, philosophy, would that ever help students or be appropriate to present to students in a way to engage with maths in a meaningful way, in a way that is even spiritual?
Well, I think definitely, in the sense that as teachers, one of our roles is to motivate the learners that are in front of us, and to encourage them and build their confidence in their ability to learn as well. So there's a whole range of stuff, but part of the motivation is is a sense of appreciating the significance of the things you're learning. And it's it will always be the case that young people will question why are we learning this, and that will never totally go away. But I think it is important when thinking about and contextualizing the use of mathematics to think very carefully about which contexts we use, and there's a real choice in that. Perhaps, I mean, let me just give you, it's perhaps a slightly simplistic example. So I was involved in a project a long time ago now, really. I realised called the Caris Project, where it was a project that was in the sort of mid 90s. Where we, because of what was happening around the curriculum more generally, there was an emphasis on thinking about the spiritual, moral, social, and cultural development of pupils, and it was very much being focused on, and it was seen as a whole curriculum endeavour. And of course, almost like us having this question now, so not particularly from a Christian perspective, but that there's a sense of wanting to develop the whole person, and developing the whole person should be a whole curriculum endeavour. So anyway, we were involved in this project. It was
and that mandate came from the Department for Education, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It was 1988 Education Act. It said, one of the purposes of education is exactly that. I think it said that schools were to promote the spiritual, moral, cultural, mental, and physical development of pupils. And then there was, it was built into Ofsted inspections as well. And Ofsted did some interesting writing about it. And so it was very much a thing that people were grappling with in a healthy way, I think, in terms of thinking about that whole person development. And so this project, it came out of, it was an Association of Christian Teachers sponsored project through what was called the Stapleford Centre, that was a sort of resource and professional development centre for Christian teachers, and I was involved in the maths project. So we kind of felt like if we can do this for maths, we can do it for anything, kind of thing. It was almost like the challenge. We're going to have a go at this, and with a group of other maths teachers, we had a go at putting some resources together. And so one of the ways into that we found was to think about context. So just a very simple thing that. You have to spend a lot of time thinking about proportion and comparison and simple ideas, relatively simple ideas in mathematics. But what context might you think about that? So we wrote a unit around giving, which isn't something that perhaps you might do something about. Well, we're going to do something about the mortgage or so on. Well, why not do something about how people give to charity, and think about that? And so setting that as a kind of a context. And obviously there's the Jesus's parable about the widow's mite, and who's given more, and so that's fundamentally a mathematical question that Jesus was asking, and how we make those sort of judgments and so on, and so there was a unit built around that kind of idea. But so just by locating it in a context which and young people are concerned about giving and charity and how things work, and there's a lots of, so that you wouldn't necessarily use the unit as it was written then, but there's an example where you can set it in a different sort of context, and that's quite an easy move pedagogically to do that.
But do you know what? I think that's really interesting, because one of the things we're often seeing now in contemporary teaching and curriculum development is the inclusion of all kinds of I use this phrase carefully, but all kinds of ideological things to sort of bring into common parlance or different social issues, etc.
Yes, indeed.
And actually, I suppose that's exactly what you were attempting to do. Obviously, probably not quite as controversial or as
no, exactly. But so it's interesting. Just on it in terms of what's happening in curriculum development in mathematics in this country at the moment. So there's quite an effort around what happens, how people carry on studying mathematics post 16, and whether they should, and apart from doing A level and things, and whether they ought to carry on. And so quite a lot of the curriculum development in that area has been thinking about a maths qualification, core maths, it's called, but that thinks a lot about applying the mathematics in context that will appeal and interest and feel relevant. And so, yeah, there's a strong emphasis on that. And that can be as diverse as you want to. So, yeah, I think there's definitely a recognition of that at that level. I think it's just I remember being one of the other subjects. So I don't want to veer off into a different one, but just to make the point that was on the Caris project was modern foreign languages. We might actually, again, people might think, well, what's there to do about that? But one of the points I remember the authors there thinking is, well, one of the things about why you learn a language is it so that you can have a good time when you're on holiday. Is that why we learn a language? Or might learning language be about the gift of hospitality and making somebody feel welcome? And so there's all these choices about what we're learning this for, how we might use it. That opens up all sorts of possibilities. And obviously that can be contested then. But there's no harm, it seems to me, for Christian teachers to think about contexts which they think lead people into thinking about things that are of value and of wider use. It's not a particularly a kind of a doctrinal point, but it's from a perspective. These things feel important, so let's consider them and use mathematics to help us to do that.
Absolutely. The application of maths in the service of society, or the application of maths in the exploration of ethics or values. And I suppose I'm finding it very interesting thinking about how you can have a very sort of exploratory or creative approach to learning and teaching, in the same way that lots of other things are absorbed into the curriculum and are kind of used almost to be those little benchmarkers of where we are now as a society. And actually, although yes, it could be a little glib and a little sort of elbowed in to some topics, that there are lots of other topics that are also elbowed in.
And to some extent, Lizzie, I think there's some things that they're just lazy resource development, frankly. They're not really elbowed in at all. They're just not that creative. And actually to do something that's creative, that's fresh, and it feels like it's touching on something that feels of wider importance, people will appreciate that. And so these aren't things that necessarily that Christians need to sort of sit in a corner and just do on their own. I think there will be others that will want to do this because they know this enhances the quality of the subject, and will want to touch on things which help pupils to appreciate the value of what they're doing.
Absolutely. The materials and the work that you did at the Stapleford Centre, are any of those still available? I mean, I know, as you say, some of the application or some of the examples might be a little outdated now, but do you still have that material?
Well, I'm sorry to say, I should have checked that, shouldn't I? But I mean, it's called the Caris project. I mean, I guess we ought to I'm sure they exist somewhere for people to get hold of. If people wanted to get in touch with me after this podcast, I'm sure I'd be happy for them to be put in contact.
Yes, there's something called What If Learning, which has some examples of what went on in Caris. I think some of them have been slightly adapted for the American market now.
Right. Okay.
So it may, for example, I'm just having a look now, and
Well, so it's Caris, CHARIS, as in grace. And so it's worth having a look. And I think it's essentially it's almost just. I think we would look back on some of the things that we did and think, oh gosh, that was a bit, we tried too hard there. But others really feel to stand the test of time and think, gosh, that's still pretty solid. Even after all these years, I think that's almost it. If it feels like there's an integrity in the mathematics teaching. And in the context and the thing that's being paid attention to, then I think it does stand the test of time. It's perhaps, yeah, I don't know if you notes on the podcast, but yeah, if
Yeah,
there's the links to it, and
we can
definitely having have a look, because I think um, it's sometimes that will trigger in other people other things that they might want to develop. I would say that one of the joys of being involved in that was working with others on it, because and we were well supported by the funding for the project and everything that went with it. But we were giving up our weekends and going away and trying to do that. But that was something, actually. It was a creative thing, and it was great to work together with other people and try and think your way through this. So yeah, I think it's, if you can find fellow travelers to work on it with, then it's even more rewarding.
Absolutely. So just a couple of questions to draw us to a conclusion. Now, I suppose you work for the National Centre for Excellence in the Teaching of Mathematics. Now, if there's any subject that I think values performance and precision, it feels like maths is the subject. In my experience, you either get it right or wrong. There's no kind of middle ground. Well, I suppose you could get a few marks for showing you're working. I don't know if that still is a thing nowadays.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yes.
But how, as a Christian, can we kind of respond to that value, that ultimate kind of performance, and that there's at time a bit of inconsistency where the English education system can value performance, precision, whilst other times seems to kind of jolt to the other extreme where, just effort and participation seems to be rewarded over achievement. How can a Christian teacher pave a way that is more?
So yeah, that's interesting. So it's interesting. I think that brings us more to how we approach the learners, really. And there is sometimes it does feel like there's a special dynamic, or there can be, around mathematics. And you're picking on your daughter again. It's an emotional process, learning. And one of the things, I suppose, what you're saying is it confronts you with it more easily confronts you with failure.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that whole right and wrong thing, it's something where and whereas in other, I can think my drawing's not brilliant, but it's not wrong. It's not and I might be able to do a slightly better drawing next time. Or even in science and stuff, that I've got some of the ideas, but not all of the ideas. Whereas no, it's wrong in maths. So and that's, there's no point shying away from that. Yes, that's wrong. That isn't right. But there's something about setting a learning culture around that, which is again, I think, a distinctive thing that the teacher can bring, and a Christian teacher, and not just Christian teachers, would want to bring. It is that sense that you can learn from your mistakes. And that culture, in fact, mistakes are really powerful places for learning, and you get lots of that going on in mathematics, and by setting a culture where we're prepared to kind of lay our mistakes before, what we did, and work through how that happened and so on. I don't know, I'm going off on a tangent now, thinking it's almost a form of confession. It's a kind of that's a useful principle in becoming an effective learner. It's how that's viewed, and if it's essentially, if that's almost celebrated by the teacher, and brilliant, well, let's see what we can figure out what's happened here and what's happened, and it not being this weight of, I haven't got it, and I just take the line that if you haven't got it, I've just not taught you properly yet. It's not you. It's we've got more to do, and let's go again. And so I don't think that needs to, it can almost be an opportunity, really, for building up a sense of the learner, and that openness to learn from where you're not quite getting it, or where you've gone down the wrong way. That's just a positive learning thing, really.
Yeah, I would say that nothing kind of confronts you with your fallibility other than when you completely flunk a maths test. It's funny, because similarly, my son was going through, he brought home a maths test that he did, and he said, we have to do the corrections at home, and I was going through them with him, And I was thinking, gosh, this is a bit demoralizing because I would say he got at least 50% of the questions wrong. And he's not really used to that. But yeah, and I wasn't necessarily saying that we need to draw out, some kind of gospel meaning from it. But I think absolutely that sense of, do you know what? Some things in life you just need to do the work. And yes, precision is important sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some things will have a black and white answer.
Yeah.
Or right or wrong, but in terms of kind of, no, we can go back, we can learn from this, and we can build a bit of resilience there. And I certainly know that's what I had to. I mean, sorry that I'm reflecting on me all the time, but I wasn't a natural mathematician, but I worked jolly hard at it.
Yes, exactly.
And eventually, I got there in the end, and it was good, and I was pleased with how I did, but yeah, I did find it very frustrating in comparison to the kind of humanities and the artsy subjects that I absolutely loved.
And I think there is a responsibility then for a teacher of mathematics to recognise they're not just a teacher of mathematics; they are a teacher of the pupils in front of them, and I do genuinely think it's a powerful subject in forming people's perceptions of themselves. Not necessarily totally. But there, there's things associated with it that it's a responsibility of the teacher to help all pupils. I mean, there's a big emphasis in the work we do, which is I almost see as a kind of almost as a social justice imperative to not exclude certain people from feeling that they can master mathematics, and so that responsibility is not just because it's a useful passport to the rest of life and all the rest of it, but it is actually because of the impact it has on the way that they think about themselves.
Yes.
And I think from a Christian worldview, we would have a very high view of the person that's in front of us. And anything that kind of works against that is perhaps something we want to kind of work against in terms of the way that we think about teaching and learning. So it's not easy. I'm not pretending that in any way that it's easy, but I think there's something else going on there, which is just probably the sort of the cultural impact of the subject that is such that there's an opportunity there really to build people up and to encourage them as learners, and that itself is a teacher's and a Christian teacher's goal.
Absolutely. I think that's really great, and that's a great place to end. I think I just really like the way that you've opened up the idea that maths can teach us perhaps in a different way to, say, English, where you can explore kind of context and themes, and you can explore kind of societal trends and authors' intention and what they're kind of saying about what sort of social commentary they're bringing. Actually, what maths does, it often shines the spotlight into your own heart without wanting to over-egg. But I remember it certainly did that with me. Certainly did that with my daughter this evening. And she got really angry at herself, at me, at her teacher, at the maths. And perhaps, there's just a very different dimension there. The subject reveals something of our own heart and our own capacity in a positive way, but also in that kind of stark way. That's really really helpful.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Well, thank you, John. I'm gonna call time there because I've got to go and pack away my daughter's maths. But really appreciate the work you're doing, and congratulations. I hear that you are going to receive your
Windsor Castle. I don't know who, but it was very exciting. Yes, in June. So
that's absolutely wonderful. Well, God bless you and congratulations.